Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Fireside Chat with Blue Key Media. Today I am joined with Kalsey from Do Good Events. Thank you so much for joining us today, Kalsey.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's great to see you.
Yeah, you as well. And we're going to be talking today about events and shifting them to online, how video plays into that, and what people should be considering as they shift to virtual events. And I'm super excited for this conversation because we do a lot with nonprofits creating videos for in-person events. So we're now going to see things shift to we're creating pre-recorded content for online stuff. So I'm looking forward to this. Kalsey, if you would just want to give me a little bit of background on your company, Do Good Events, and kind of where you got to, who you serve, who your customers are, and where you are today.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. So my company is Do Good Events. I started about 8 years ago, and we focus on business and nonprofit events and really take those logistics off our clients' plates so they can focus on the relationship building, revenue generating parts of their event. We had about 150 events this past year and assisted our nonprofit partners in raising almost $9 million. So it's been really interesting watching this quick pivot to different types of events because we all know those fundraisers continue to be mission critical for everybody. So yeah, this will be a fun conversation today.
Awesome. So tell me a little bit about, what is happening in the event space right now? It's just rocked. I've got, obviously we do some stuff with nonprofits. I used to be in weddings, and I know like all weddings are pretty much canceled until the end of the year or being pushed back. What's happening with you and in your world right now?
Totally. So we're sitting here now. We're kind of like late April, you and I chatting. And I feel like every day is new and different. And this continues to be obviously evolving. So everything I say in a place of everything's still a little ambiguous and we're all figuring it out as we go. There's no playbook because we haven't been here before. So we're just quickly figuring out best practices. So we've been working with our clients on what's the best route given what we know today for spring, summer, and fall events in particular. And for some clients, that means canceling their event. It's not often the best choice, but if your funds aren't mission critical right now, if your event wasn't gaining traction anyways, we have had some clients that canceling has made the most sense. We've had then a large bucket of clients that's postponing has made a lot of sense. I will say that made a lot of sense at first, and now I feel like the situation continues to not. We don't know when the end is in sight. So that postponing is starting to be some of our clients that postponed. We're now looking to pivot to virtual. And then we've gone virtual with some of our clients or will be, or doing kind of a hybrid model where maybe we're doing a virtual event today because there is mission critical funds needed. Maybe there's auction items that we're going to expire. So we're doing an online auction, but really the program piece has to be in person. And so even if we have to wait 6 months or a year, the groups that would rather do this hybrid of a small virtual event now or an online giving campaign and then more in person later. But I will say the majority of things are going to that virtual event space and doing some combination. And when I say virtual, it's either like maybe a live streamed event or it's a giving campaign, online auction type of a thing. So that's kind of the routes we're seeing everybody pivot into right now.
Sure. What is that virtual campaign, the online giving, like what does that look like exactly? I can wrap my head around a virtual event, but not quite that.
Totally. So I think especially at first, we saw a lot of folks use like the Facebook and YouTube platforms or IGTV, pretty free, pretty easy. So those were seamless options, and often tying that in with maybe like a mobile bidding site that was hosting your donations page and hosting maybe some auction items if you had them. More and more, I think we're starting to see pivots towards like Zoom. Zoom's actually got some really neat features that allow people to maybe gather virtually at their table like they would have at the gala and be able to experience things in a small group setting. So we're seeing Zoom and some of those platforms that have some different opportunities come to play. They have small costs, but they're really quite reasonable. And more some kind of more customized options, partnering with maybe AV companies and doing more of their own hubs that are housed on the nonprofit website. So I think that's kind of the tangible structure we're seeing people go more and more with it. We're also, I think we're going to see maybe some small watch parties or small I keep calling them kind of like studio audience events, where we might have small groups that gather in the ballroom and then live stream the event out. Obviously, we're not doing that yet, but I think that might be something we see later in the summer and into the fall, is more this experience where there's a small group physically together with program content from a stage, live streaming it out, and maybe folks being encouraged to have some watch parties and get-togethers that way to still kind of build that community piece of events.
Yeah, that I like that idea of like a small studio audience. I've watched different like workshops or things like that where, there might be 20 people that are in person, but for the most part, everyone's watching it online. And it does create like a kind of a unique experience, seeing that in-person audience, and it allows for some engagement. So I like that approach. Have you had people, or do you have clients that are thinking about doing that right now, or is it just all possibilities are being thrown out on the table?
That's a good question. I mean, right now, I think most of our clients, we are literally planning simultaneously on 3 paths of, business as usual, some sort of hybrid in-studio experience and watch party, and then a fully virtual. At this point, most of our events were postponed till late July or beyond. And so we're kind of working in this space of simultaneous planning of, okay, if we can be, and business as usual, obviously we'll have a lot of changes to it. But if we can be back together in person, what does that look like? If we need to have small groups in person, because that's either what we're allowed to do by guidelines and regulation standpoints, or we're having a lot of conversation around when will people be ready? And we don't know that answer yet, but when will people have the confidence to gather in a ballroom space? And what might that threshold of number be that people are comfortable with when we first are kind of able to be a little more out and about. So those are kind of some of the things we're talking about. So planning simultaneously right now on options A, B, and C a bit, and what fully virtual would look like, as well. I think we learned a lot this spring when everything happened very quickly and we had to make really fast pivots, and we didn't have a lot of time to consider the choices. We just had to make decisions. I mean, we had our first event to go virtual, we did it with 48 hours notice, basically. So we had a couple clients that, it was a mad dash to pulling it off. And now it's both a blessing and a curse to have more time, right? Because now we can really think about things a lot more and spend time making sure we're making the best choices. So I think as we have that time, it's giving people, a lot of time to just see what's happening out there. Obviously, technologies are changing super, super rapidly as well. So so it's just interesting having learned a lot from the spring, we're now being able to apply those practices. And I think people recognize we don't know what the future holds. And even if we're planning for a November event, we never know if, there's the rumors of resurgences. And would that mean that all of a sudden another event in November could in 48 hours have to go to virtual? So I think for a long time, we might see ourselves having virtual in our back pocket for events, just in case. I don't know. That's one of my hypotheses, but we'll see.
Yeah, for sure. So video elements, whether that be a patient story or some sort of like brand anthem or a video piece that gets people excited at the start of an event. Obviously, nonprofits have been doing that for a long time. And it's been an important element, but how are those video pieces playing in a virtual event, and what type of video content are you guys planning now to be able to adapt and change to this new environment?
I think the videos are going to be even more important than ever. I think these events that are going virtual are going to have portions of it that are live and portions of it that are very well known to be pre-recorded, and then portions that are like supposed to appear live but are actually recorded. So I think that video piece is going to become so important because we're going to need to take people from their homes into the experience, and we're going to need to get them in their homes to that same emotional arc that we were doing at nonprofit events. And we were able to do it by putting a testimonial speaker on the stage and by showing that video like you talked about right before the giving moment. But I think the videos are going to be one of the most powerful ways for us to elicit that emotion from someone who's sitting on their couch and be able to make the experience feel different than I'm watching TV on a Tuesday night. So I think those videos are going to allow us to do that a lot more. They're also potentially going to be one of the ways we can safely enter into spaces that otherwise maybe the general public wouldn't be able to, whether that's in somebody's home to take that testimonial video, or if that is being able to go, into the nonprofit center and talk to constituents and things. So I think that video more than ever is going to be able to take us places and really just elicit that emotion that's a little more challenging to do virtually than there's a lot to be said about feeling the energy of a ballroom.
You're right.
And we can't get that through the screen. So I think those videos can help us at least get a little closer to it.
Yeah, that's a really good point about there is a feeling, there's an energy inside a room that isn't going to be there now, and it's going to be harder to create that. So how do people need to think differently about their events? Because it can't just be, what you did in that ballroom now, totally, just digital, right? You have to rethink the whole way that you go about it, because how people are engaging and the environment that they're in is completely different. So how are you helping people think through that? What should people be considering?
Yeah. I think it begins with thinking about your virtual event like your in-person event of user experience, and not just throwing together different video segments, but what is that full user experience? So from the time I get my pre-event email with instructions, are they clear and concise? Do I know exactly what to do? Am I starting to hear a little bit of the message and impact? Do I know how I can donate? Once somebody logs in, I think there's moments that people are forgetting about, is like what happens in that 10 minutes when guests are logging in, what's going through the slideshow, what kind of music is playing, how can you make that impactful and maybe have a surprise and delight in there. So I think thinking through all those user experience moments is one important thing as people think about their virtual event. I love events with a surprise and delight. And so I think continuing to think about how we do that virtually, for some folks that is taking a tangible thing and being able to bring a bit of an in-home experience. So I know there's one group doing like a gala in a box, and they're going to be, sending a bottle of wine and a food item and a program. So are there things we can send to people at their homes? Are there things they download ahead of time and it's an interactive piece that they work with? Obviously depending on the event, there's surveys and polls and different things you can do to keep engagement online. I think being in a virtual space, there's just a lot more competing for people's attention, and it's so easy to quickly click onto Amazon or click away to something. And so keeping that connection, there's research coming out saying that if you have a screen with a person on it the whole time and not just a slide, there's more engagement by seeing the person and the slide side by side. So I think just a lot of interesting things like that makes sense once you hear it, but thinking about it. The other thing is it's a lot shorter of a program. So it's much shorter, simpler. You really want to get that concise, authentic messaging in place. But we're seeing, most programs being a max of 30 minutes. And you're going to want to remind people often and right away about how to give, because viewership will, kind of peak about 5 minutes in, and then about 15 minutes in, it starts to drop off until the end. So you want to make sure you deliver some strong messages right away, which is a little bit different than in person.
Right.
But you want to make sure you get a little bit of that right away, and that you're telling people often how they can donate, so that you're often telling them, here's the impact and here's how to follow through. So I think those are, some of the biggest things we've been learning so far.
Yeah, that is interesting that you're seeing events that were once, might be like 2-3 hours are now 30 minutes. Like, that's crazy. And I can't even imagine. It's going to take a lot of critical thinking and creative thinking on how do you communicate that now concisely and get the same impact or close to the same impact that you might have in a 3-hour event.
Totally.
But I like that idea of creating the event in a box, or whatever you call that little care package that someone might receive and be able to interact, because that's the hardest part, is what once was a two-way interaction, right? A presenter is able to interact with the audience, and the audience can interact with the presenter. It's much, much more challenging. So I like that idea of having those physical elements so that you still have that two-way interaction, even if it isn't fully two-way.
Well, it can be a great opportunity to give a little more gratitude to sponsors, VIPs, or maybe even a revenue stream. I think that we're going to start to see, maybe, I will say almost all the virtual events are free right now for nonprofits, right? You'd rather get as many people on as you can, but maybe there's a VIP experience, and that's $100 or $200. And that's where you
Right.
get this VIP box of sorts. So I think it's a couple interesting different ways you can think about it. We've got a couple events that had strong like restaurant partners and things like that involved too. And it's a way to potentially bring in some local businesses that maybe would have been a big part of your in-person event and keep them involved and connected too. So there's just some interesting things to think about. How can you take some of those in-person elements? I guess actually a couple other cool things I've seen people do is maybe they had a celebrity MC, even a local celebrity MC,
Sure.
or, an athlete that's come to their event. Can they do a guest appearance on your virtual event? I think there's a lot more access to some celebrities and things like that right now too. So just lots of interesting, like what did you have in person and how can you bring that with you into this new program?
Sure. Are you, how are you seeing video change in terms of the types of videos that you're creating now or that would be incorporated? And yeah, are you seeing shifts where you might have, like we were talking about those testimonials, but now maybe you have a video that we've never really seen before, that is adding to the experience?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question for you to answer too, I think, but certainly we're seeing, I think just access to things that we didn't necessarily have before. I don't know if it's because people are home and therefore have a little bit more time, but I'm finding that maybe we're getting testimonials and just endorsements, I think, from people that we wouldn't have before. But I think it's still, obviously up till this point, most events that had to pivot to virtual didn't have a lot of time to create necessarily a lot of new content in video. It was kind of working with what they had and then maybe having their MC or their founder or their ED or their auctioneer, kind of talking and pre-recording some of those different elements. So I think that's going to be something that we'll know more of in the coming months. But I guess I'd be curious if you've seen anything, because I don't feel like I have a great answer for that question.
I mean, the only thing and we kind of talked about this offline, but just how you maybe would have maybe it's a 15-minute presentation. In this case, we were doing a video for my church. It was the Easter program. So rather than just having the, 45 minutes of somebody on stage or in front of a wall talking, right, and giving his sermon, how do you now create a experience where you're bringing them to, what they're talking about? So if you're talking about, I don't know, maybe you're talking about something in the hospital and you're in the hospital, like you're now able to transport your presenters into the environment that they're talking directly about, or however that's going to help enhance the story they're telling. To hopefully keep people engaged more, right? Because you're probably your ears might perk up. You might listen if you're like, oh, that's kind of cool where he's at. Like, what do they have to say? Versus everything just being in front of the exact same background like you traditionally would if you were in person. Someone's up at a podium and they talk, and that's normal. That's expected. You're engaged because you're sitting there and you're in an audience, and sure, you might, talk with the people next to you for a little bit and tune out for, 5 minutes, but you still always come back. So that's one thing that we're seeing, that. but the other opportunity is user created video and versus hiring a video production company to do everything. You saw it with SNL, and they did that Zoom call, right? And they produced a whole show over Zoom, and they create these really great skits, right? And you expect a high quality when you traditionally watch it on TV, but nobody cared that everything was just on their computer's camera, and it was all over Zoom. And so I think you might see a shift in the people being more accepting of lower quality video, and you might be able to find unique cases that you traditionally wouldn't be able to show at an in-person event, that can help create an more together experience. So
I love that. No, you're right. People are definitely more forgiving on some of those production elements. If they can hear and see, then you're golden.
Right. So what are some of the opportunities that you're seeing or challenges with virtual event that that are now coming up as you're planning these, or that you've seen past events? What are opportunities you're seeing, and the difficulties of putting one on?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the opportunities really are fairly endless, especially right now. I think actually to even piggyback a little off your point of people having grace on the production, I think people just have a lot of grace right now in what events look like. I've had a couple clients really nervous about like, oh my gosh, we've never done a weekday night in the summer, but those are the options right now. And folks understand that we're kind of in a little bit of we're removed from kind of regularly scheduled programming right now. And a lot of things can be more audience accepted than wouldn't have been before. So the opportunities, I think, are really vast. I think one of the biggest things we're seeing is that folks are removing barriers for people to participate in the program. Geographic barriers are removed, so you can have an audience that is nationwide and beyond versus those who before could only physically get to your event. So that's a huge one. So are barriers like folks who couldn't afford a ticket, maybe folks who had a conflict that night. They might still have that conflict and they might not be part of your live numbers, but they might watch later on. So it's really interesting seeing some of these barriers removed and watching. I think every virtual event we've done at this point has had, I think, 3 times as many folks as would have been in their ballroom per se. So that's been really cool to see, and helps to tie into another opportunity, which is that you can really make a lot of money. I think right now folks do want to give to the causes that are meaningful to them. They want to understand the impact their dollars are having, which isn't new, but that's even more important than ever before. But if you can tie that together for them, when they're tuning in, their intent, I believe, is to donate and is to be inspired to give in that half hour or whatever they have with you. And so if you can do that, I think folks are really crushing their event goals. It also helps that costs are down. Virtual events are a lot cheaper than in-person events. So there's some really neat opportunities with virtual in that way. And then I think, like everything we've talked about up to this point of where you can take them virtually that you maybe couldn't have in person. So I think that's been really cool to see. Of course, the challenges are that, there's just no replicating an in-person event. You don't get that energy of a room. You don't get that full experience per se. You're not getting the food and beverage and the table conversation and all of those elements. And I think the building of a memory, which is one of my favorite parts about events, is, we look forward to events and we remember them. And I think that's harder to come by in the virtual space unless, you're really encouraging people to somehow do that in their living room. And that might just be simply by asking them to wear a certain color and send in a picture. There's really small things you can do to create engagement from home too. But I think that there's just, no replacing that being in person piece. A lot of people are really worried about technology. So I think that's a bit of a curve still. That's a challenge for virtual events. It very much reminds me of where we were with mobile bidding a couple of years ago, and a lot of organizations being very fearful to go away from the pen and paper and move on to a mobile bidding platform for their silent auctions. So I think the good news is the technology isn't as scary as it seems, and you can quickly be guided through it. And then I think, lastly, there's just a lot of noise in the virtual space right now, and I don't know if that's going to be the way of the world for a while, or if that's just our current circumstances. But right now it's really loud. There's a lot of stuff to watch, to see. I think we're all getting a little bit of screen burnout happening. And I don't know if that's going to be the way it feels in September and October, or if that's just kind of the current situation. But I do think it's just a little bit noisy. So you really need to have strong ambassadors, board members, table hosts, things like that going into your event that are helping to promote it, helping to encourage it. It has been one of the biggest things that we've learned and have heard from many of our auctioneer partners and things, is that not everybody is positioned well for a virtual event. You still need to build momentum getting into it and have those connections. So I think those are kind of some of the opportunities and challenges that we've identified at this point.
That's a good point at the end. Not everybody is going to be a good fit for a virtual event. Who do you have like some general guidelines? I'm sure it all depends, right? But who generally do you see as a good fit, and who might not be a good fit? What situations would lead to you recommending not doing a virtual event?
Yeah, and I think most nonprofits can position themselves to become a good candidate, and most corporate clients, I think, definitely can. But the thing is about having a following already. If you're a new event and it was your first year and you hadn't built a lot of oomph behind you yet, like it's going to be a challenge. If you hadn't already had some committed table captains, maybe a committee that was helping you with the planning, I think those are the times we're going to see really a big challenge, is when events were maybe sitting on one person's shoulders or something like that. But I think that's definitely one of the most important things, is to treat your event just like, actually, I heard an auctioneer today say, treat your event, your virtual event, kind of like a capital campaign, where you're really spending a lot of time on the front end, picking up the phone, asking people to participate. You're getting that pre-event buy-in from folks versus just having them show up and expecting that they're going to give. So I think that's one thing, maybe in that, groups that are able to position themselves with a matching gift. We're seeing matching gifts are doing pretty well online. It's another kind of engagement tool too for folks, that if you're able to get someone to donate $10,000 and match every gift at the $100 level or something like that. So folks that have some of those capabilities and resources in their organizations, we're seeing groups that, really have the time. I mean, virtual events do take a lot of time. It's different time than planning an in-person event, but you really need a sharp script. You need, not like beautiful production with lights and things like that necessarily, but you need really clear production. So people that have time to get those recordings done, that have time for that messaging piece and to think that through, that have time to prepare their speakers and presenters and make sure, just like from the stage, you never want anybody kind of going off the cuff on a virtual event either. So groups that are doing those sorts of things, that seems to be what we're seeing to be successful. So I think most people could position themselves there. I would just hesitate to push anyone virtual who didn't have the bandwidth of time and resources to put into it.
Yeah, that's true. There is, I can't even imagine the amount of work that goes into a in-person event. I just think back to when I planned my wedding, and I'm so thankful I had a wedding planner, because there were so many details that I didn't have to worry about, and they just figured it out for me. So you guys do a lot, but I'm just thinking, like, from a digital perspective, moving it virtual, like, that amount of detail does not, go down at all. Right. There's a lot that still has to be figured out. Like you said, like, you might need to be even more tight, because and make sure that everything is going to flow, from point A to point B, because, in person, you might be able to ad lib a little bit, right? And there might be some of that organic stuff, and you just kind of feel it out with the audience. But you can't necessarily do that. I think to maybe like a newsroom, everything is they have to schedule everything out, and there's a team of like 30 people in the control room making sure everything is working and right. So I could see that being one challenge, but that's why you need somebody like you and a team that can help them organize an event at this scale. So,
our virtual project plans are just as long as our in-person project plans. It's just a little different, and there's just a lot more you need to think about in the communications and the promotions and getting your pre and post event value out of it and such too. So it's very interesting in this new space for all of us.
For sure. On the corporate side, we've talked a lot about nonprofits, but what types of events are going virtual on the corporate side? Like, what are those? Were most of them like, an annual event that they had, or some sort of employee appreciation, or what are the events that you're having to move virtual?
What we're seeing so far is more professional growth, maybe more industry connected and more being able to put speakers online and still have attendees get that professional growth and that kind of lesson, if you will, from that speaker. One of the biggest challenges that we're working through is that networking piece that's so important at professional events is a lot harder online. There's some really cool tools out there for, surveys and engagements and allowing people to, ping other attendees and create a virtual room basically for you to network in, but it's just that's really hard to replicate networking. But we are seeing, but it's still great to be able to get access to some amazing speakers. Some folks are able to afford speakers that maybe they wouldn't have been able to afford in person, to do virtual events for them. So I think that's one thing. We haven't seen much with the employee appreciation yet. I think that's another one that's a little bit difficult to replicate. Although I had a client the other day, I was one of their celebrity judges, and they did these Zoom skits. It was hysterical. So I think people are kind of getting creative on company culture on their own, and figuring out ways to do it. But I think I could see down the road that might be something. We've had a couple clients we've helped like send gifts to employees and some, more fun surprise and delight, things like that. But mostly the corporate stuff is for that learning, that education.
Sure.
Sometimes with, continuing education credits to it, stuff like that.
Gotcha. I'm sure that there's a lot we could dive into there, but that's another whole 30-minute
that's another chat.
So is there anything else before we go that people should be thinking about when it comes to video in their virtual event, or anything that we didn't quite cover that you think is worth knowing and worth hearing?
Great question. We've talked a lot about the video. I think that's so important. I think right now it's really just everybody being proactive to consider, what are your plans A, B, and C for your event? And I think even if your event is hopeful and likely to be in person, it's going to look really different when we're back together. And so what does that mean? Do you need to take your registration to touchless somehow? Do you need to reconsider your menu? I think we're not going to be serving buffets like we were serving them before. So I think thinking through those types of things for your event, right now, I don't think anybody's immune to not experiencing some sort of change and some sort of evolution with their event. You might also find, if you're feeling hesitant to this, that it might become a new expectation. I don't know that yet, but I think that we might find more and more events that are still in person, because again, we just can't replace that, but have an expectation of some sort of online component. So just, I think, being mindful of it. And of course, happy to always try to chat through with people if they have questions on what that might look like for them. Cause I know it's scary, cause it's a new frontier for a lot of us.
Yeah. It will be really interesting to see how things play out over the next weeks, months, and how things will be different, 2 years from now, when all this is done.
Right.
There will be a new normal, and hopefully events and the people that put on these events are able to benefit from. Sure, this time really stinks right now, but I think there could be some really good things that come out. And with that virtual component that seemed really scary and maybe wasn't a necessity, now they see the opportunity of, like you had mentioned before, you can reach so many more people, that you really just break down barriers on being able to attend and participate. So absolutely. Maybe that's maybe all events in the future have a virtual component with their in-person, or at least some sort of ability for people to tune in. So it'll be interesting to see how it pans out. Really, I'm feeling for you guys, because
and you too.
I mean, we're experiencing, we just can't do anything right now. We can't film because everything's shut down, and you guys can't have your events, which I can't imagine and not knowing when things are going to end. So hoping things turn around for all of us, and like everyone's saying, we're all in this together. So
we are. We're all going to be ready for some really good parties on the other side.
For sure. 100%. And how do people connect with you, Kalsey, if they need help with their events, or thinking through going virtual, or just retooling the event that they had planned?
Thank you. Awesome. Yeah. You can go to our website, dogoodevents.com, and do our contact us form there, or feel free to find me on LinkedIn. We also do a monthly newsletter and some really awesome stuff on our social media streams, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, all those. So follow those, and we'll keep you up to date on what we're learning as we do.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Kalsey, for joining me.
Thank you.
Stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll talk soon.
You as well. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.